Jesse Pinkman kept telling the truth. The world just kept hearing a junkie's lies. Across all of Breaking Bad, Jesse is one of the only characters who repeatedly tries to confess, warn people, or simply do the right thing. And almost every time he gets dismissed, manipulated, or written off as unstable. Which raises a strange question. How many times does Jesse say something important while everyone around him treats it like background noise? Because on paper, Jesse should be the least trustworthy person in the room. He's a burnout, a former C student, and a small-time dealer with a long history of bad decisions. But when it really matters, Jesse is often the one trying to tell the truth about Walt, about Brock, and even about his own limits, while almost nobody believes him. So that's the question driving this video. Is Jesse actually untrustworthy, or have people already decided who he is long before he ever gets a chance to change? We're going to follow that idea chronologically, tracking every moment Jesse's credibility is ignored, dismissed, or quietly destroyed. The missed confessions. The times Walt encourages people to see Jesse as unstable. The way law enforcement looks straight at a man who knows almost everything and still sees nothing more than a junkie. Because if people had trusted Jesse at just a few key moments, the entire story starts to change. We'll start with Jesse's reputation before Walt, then follow how that image gets weaponized throughout the series, and by the end, we'll reach the cruel irony at the heart of his character. By the time Jesse becomes one of the most morally trustworthy people in the room, he's also the one person nobody is willing to believe. So let's pin this down. Jesse Pinkman isn't just the tragic screw-up who keeps getting unlucky. The show quietly engineers him into the ideal scapegoat, the guy everyone assumes is lying, even in the rare moments where he's the only one in the room actually telling the truth. Here's the thing, we're not just talking vibes or fan sympathy, we can track how that reputation is built, layer by layer, until it hardens into a cage he cannot break, no matter what he says or how right he is. Think about it like a 3-story house of mistrust. The foundation is Jesse's pre-existing stigma. Before Walt ever climbs through that bedroom window, Jesse is already that kid. The burnout student from Walt's chemistry class. The disappointment son his parents practically rehearsed being ashamed of. The small-time dealer the cops see as background noise, not a real player. At the time, that all feels like color, just texture for his character. But it's the first clue. It means every teacher, every family member, every cop already has a story in their head. Jesse lies, Jesse uses, Jesse fails. On top of that, we get the second layer, Walt weaponizing that story. Once they partner up, Walt doesn't just rely on Jesse's bad image, he actively deepens it. He tells Gus and Mike that Jesse is unstable, a liability, a junkie who can't be trusted with responsibility. To be fair, Jesse does screw up, and he is high sometimes. We're not pretending he's secretly Gale 2.0. But here's the thing, even in the episodes where Jesse is clean, focused, and right about what's going on, Walt keeps feeding everyone around them the same line, that Jesse is the weak link. Then comes the third layer, institutional bias. Cops, Dia, rival dealers, even guys like Todd's uncle's crew all look at Jesse and see disposable trash, a low-level user, not a credible witness. So when he panics, or breaks down, or tries to confess, they read it as weakness. Not as a giant red flag that he actually knows something. It's another missed opportunity every single time someone shrugs and goes, he's just a junkie. Our roadmap is going to follow these layers in order. We'll start back at the pilot and those school flashbacks, where Jesse's reputation is already poisoned before he says a word. Then we'll move through the Gus era, where Walt systematically undercuts Jesse's credibility while pretending to mentor him. And finally, we'll land in Season 5 when Jesse is desperately trying to expose Walt, throwing money out of his car, going to Hank, begging people to listen, and nobody really does. Along the way, we're going to separate the fair mistrust from the unfair. When Jesse is high, paranoid, or genuinely unreliable, we'll call that out. But hear me out, we're also going to flag the scenes where he's sober, morally clear, and still dismissed out of hand. Because by the time we reach those late-game confrontations, it's actually more reasonable for you, the audience, to trust Jesse than Walt, Saul, or even Hank in certain scenes. The tragedy is that the characters never catch up. And in the next section, we'll see exactly how early that gap between who Jesse is and how he's perceived starts to open. So let's roll the tape back. Because that gap between who Jesse is and how people see him, it doesn't start in the RV. It starts in a high school classroom, with Walter White already deciding what kind of person Jesse Pinkman is. Walt's memory of Jesse is brutally simple. The burnout kid in the back row, the guy drawing comics instead of taking notes, failing tests, never applying himself. When Walt recognizes Captain Cook on the D-Raid, he doesn't hesitate for a second. Of course, the idiot from chemistry class grew up to be a small-time meth cook. To be fair, that's the obvious conclusion if you only ever looked at Jesse's surface. But here's the thing. Walt was the smartest adult in Jesse's life, the one person who could have seen potential in that kid, and even he filed Jesse under lost cause years before the pilot. Now jump to Jesse's parents. Their house is spotless. Their tone is not. When we see them, they don't talk about Jesse like a struggling son. They talk about him like a chronic leak in the ceiling, always dripping, always a problem, always making them look bad. Think about it. Every conversation is about the mess he left. The drugs, the lies, the embarrassment at the country club. It's never, what happened to you? It's, what did you do to us? And then you have the golden child Jake, piano recitals, straight A energy, the kid they show off. The contrast is the point. Jesse isn't just disappointing, he's the cautionary tale that makes the younger son shine brighter. When they kick Jesse out after the joint found in the house, it plays like tough love. But if you watch their faces, it's evident this is about protecting their image and the good kid, not understanding why Jesse is using in the first place. Hear me out. Once your own parents treat you like a walking red flag, why would anyone else give you the benefit of the doubt? Then there's the community. Suburban neighbors see Jesse as the sketchy guy with loud music and bad friends. On the street, he's Captain Cook, which sounds less like a serious criminal and more like a cartoon mascot. That goofy name, the bragging about chili powder meth, the baggy clothes and fake swagger, it's armor. Jesse leans into being a joke because both worlds have already decided he is one. The suburbs think he's trash, the real players in the game think he's small time. He's stuck performing a version of himself that nobody trusts, and this sets up a brutal pattern. Once everyone agrees you're a screw-up, every future claim you make gets filtered through that story. You say you're in danger, you're being dramatic. You say someone's abusing you, you're deflecting. You say you want to change, you've said that before. By the time the meth empire even exists, Jesse's credibility is already bankrupt. But still, another missed opportunity. Nobody stops to ask what happens when a guy with that reputation finally starts telling the truth. Because in the next phase, Walt will weaponize that old image, and law enforcement will happily buy it, turning Jesse's entire past into the perfect shield for Heisenberg. The pilot. This is where the show quietly rigs the game against Jesse from frame one. We meet him on a rooftop, not in a classroom or a family dinner, but half-dressed, scrambling, pants around his ankles, tripping over himself while a Dia raid unfolds below. Hank is downstairs, armored up, cracking jokes, walking through doors like he owns the place. Jesse is upstairs, diving headfirst into a hedge to escape. Right away, it's obvious who the camera wants you to respect and who it wants you to laugh at. Think about it. Same bust, same operation, two men in the meth world. One is Agent Schrader, competent, confident, framed like a hero. The other is Captain Cook, literally sliding off a roof. And this is the guy Walt chooses as a partner. But here's the thing. Walt doesn't pick Jesse because he trusts him. He picks Jesse because he doesn't. Walt sees a clue in that rooftop disaster. This is a small-time, sloppy dealer who's already on the Dia's radar. That makes Jesse the perfect shield. If anything goes wrong, law enforcement already has a name and a face. It's suspicious how fast Walt locks onto the least credible criminal he knows. Hear me out. When Walt corners Jesse after the raid, he doesn't say, "I need someone I can rely on." He basically says, "You know the business, I know the chemistry." Translation, you're my access to the streets and my built-in fall guy. At the time, it plays like a quirky team-up. On rewatch, it's Walt drafting the perfect patsy. Then we get to the first cook, the RV in the desert. This should be their great partnership moment. Walt brings the science, Jesse brings the distribution. On paper, balanced, on screen, every piece of chaos gets stapled to Jesse. Jesse fumbles the gas mask, doesn't listen to instructions, nearly gasses them both. He mishandles the pseudo, argues, complains about the smell, tracks dirt into Walt's pristine lab setup. The camera keeps cutting to his confusion, his screw-ups, his panic. Walt, even when he's out of his depth, is framed as calm and methodical. Same RV, same danger, totally different narrative treatment. Then Crazy 8 and Emilio show up, and the pattern hardens. When Emilio recognizes Jesse from the raid, the blame lands squarely on him. Emilio doesn't say, "Who's this suspicious new old guy?" He says, "You led them right to us. Walt's just the awkward chemistry teacher who must have ratted. Jesse is the idiot who got followed." When the violence hits, Walt's actions are framed as reluctant, almost rational. He's forced to poison them. He's forced to choke Crazy 8. The show gives him planning, lists, a broken plate as evidence. Jesse? He's unconscious, high, or freaking out. His fear reads as incompetence, not conscience. By the end of the pilot, the rule is set: if something goes wrong, assume it's Jesse's fault. Walt assumes it. Crazy 8 assumes it. Even you, as a viewer, kind of buy it. Pattern interrupt for your brain. What if the pilot isn't asking, can we trust Walt? But why does nobody ever trust Jesse? Because that bias doesn't stay in the ARV. It's about to follow him into every relationship he has, from dealers to the DIA, family court of public opinion. Jesse versus his parents. This is the first place you really see that blame Jesse rule hard-coded into people who should know him best. Think about it. Jesse shows up at the house not as the loud, chaotic burnout we met in the pilot, but as this painfully awkward, overly polite guest in his own childhood home. He wipes his feet, he calls his dad sir, he compliments the remodel. You can feel him trying to present a calmer, more respectful version of himself, like he's auditioning for the role of good son one last time. But here's the thing, his parents don't even see the performance. The second he walks in, they default to suspicion. Their faces do that tight, polite smile that just screams, "What did you do this time?" Every question is loaded. Where are you staying? Are you working? It's not curiosity. It's a checklist of red flags they're sure he's already tripping. Then you get the contrast. Jake, the golden child. They proudly parade out his piano playing, talk about his future, his potential, how gifted he is. Same living room, totally different energy. With Jake, every small success is evidence that he's trustworthy. With Jesse, every breath is evidence that he's not. You're watching a family that has already decided which son is the asset and which son is the liability. And to be fair, at the time, Jesse has given them reasons to worry. Drugs, school problems, all of that is real. But still, another missed opportunity. Because in this scene, he's actually trying. He's sober, he's calm, he's asking for a chance. They don't update their files even 1%. Then comes the eviction. This is the key moment. Jesse is honest about staying in the house. He doesn't lie, doesn't dodge. He straight up says he's been there. When the joint is found in the basement, he does the same thing. He tells them it's not his. And you know he's telling the truth because we watched Walt plant it. The audience gets the obvious clue that Jesse is finally being honest. His parents? Instant verdict. No deliberation, no benefit of the doubt, not even a follow-up question. They don't consider his denial plausible for a single second. The decision is absolute, you're out. The house, your stuff, your childhood, gone, hear me out. This isn't just a sad backstory beat. This is Jesse's operating system getting written in real time. When the people who raised you, who know your favorite cereal and your worst nightmares, refuse to believe you even when you're telling the truth, it becomes way easier to just lean into the role they already expect. Why bother fighting to be seen as honest if the verdict is locked in before you speak? So Jesse learns a brutal lesson. This isn't what you think never works on people who've already decided who you are. And that little family courtroom? It's just the starter version. Because later, he's going to say those exact vibes to the Dia, to Gus, and especially to Walt. And everyone, in their own way, will answer, "We already know who you are, Jesse." The scary part is what he does once he starts believing them, so when everyone keeps saying, "We already know who you are, Jesse," he eventually does the easiest thing. He just starts playing the part. The junkie mask. This is Jesse's safest costume. Think about it. Those early scenes with him getting high in that filthy house, surrounded by guys who are basically background noise with pipes. He's loud. He's clownish. He's cracking jokes about Cap'n Cook and chili powder like he's proud of being the punchline. On the surface, it's just comic relief. But here's the thing, that whole act is armor. If he's the funny burnout, you can't hurt him by calling him a failure. He already did it first. Watch how he uses drugs as a shield. Bad day? Smoke? Got rejected? Smoke more. Gets called out by his parents? He doesn't argue that they're wrong, he leans into it. He shows up high, he trashes the house, he lets them see exactly what they expect to see. It's self-sabotage as performance art. The more they treat him like a lost cause, the more he commits to the bit. That's the feedback loop. People see junkies screw up, so they only notice the clues that confirm it. Jesse senses they've already decided who he is, so he doubles down on the persona. To be fair, he really does make it easy to miss the serious moments. When a guy is constantly joking, slurring, stumbling, how are you supposed to tell when he's actually being honest? The mask doesn't just fool other people, it starts to fool him. You see this most clearly with Jane. Their first interactions are almost a test. He lies about using, he pretends he's got his life together, that he's just some quirky tenant with a motorcycle and a dream. Then the truth leaks out, and he admits he's a user. But even when he's finally real with her, you can feel it, he expects her not to believe him. Or worse, to believe him and walk away. So intimacy becomes another stage for the same act. He alternates between bravado and self-loathing, between I'm a big-time meth cook and I'm just a junkie. Jane has to keep asking, are you serious? Because with Jesse, seriousness is never obvious. Every confession sounds like another high guy story. And this is important. None of this is to absolve Jesse. He chooses the drugs. He chooses the lies. He blows up his own chances. But here's the thing. Those choices blur the line between real unreliability and perceived unreliability. By the time he actually is reliable, nobody can tell the difference. It all just looks like more junkie drama. So be honest with yourself. If you only had those early episodes, would you trust this guy with anything serious? Your gut says no, right? That instinct is exactly what the show is setting up, because soon, Jesse will finally have the truth in his hands and the world will treat it like just another high. But hear me out. Because even while the show is telling you do not trust this guy, Jesse is quietly doing things that should make you pause. The problem is, nobody in his world is really watching. Take the Crazy 8 storyline. Early on, when Walt is still treating this like a fun side quest, Jesse is the one going, absolutely not. You do not mess with serious distributors. He knows Crazy 8's reputation. He knows that once you're in with real players, you don't just walk away. To Walt, it sounds like cowardice. To you, if you think about it. It's actually a pretty realistic risk assessment from the supposed screw-up. That's the first clue the show drops about Jesse's competence. He understands the street in a way Walt never will. He knows that word travels, that people remember faces, that a high school teacher in tighty whities is not invisible just because he feels invisible. Walt misses all of that, because in his head, he's the genius and Jesse is the red flag. Then look at distribution. Jesse is the one who already has customers. He's the one who knows which corners are open, which houses are hot, who pays, who robs. Is it sloppy? Yeah, the ARV, the clownish hazmat suit, the junkie friends. But here's the thing. He still builds an actual business. He moves product. He finds new buyers. That's basic entrepreneurial skill, just wrapped in chaos. Nobody treats it like skill though. Walt talks to him like a lazy student who forgot his homework. Combo and Badger just see another burnout buddy with better drugs. Even his parents only see the kid who flunked out, not the guy who can organize a whole distribution chain overnight. And then you get those moral hesitations. Jesse's not just scared of violence, he's disturbed by it. His reaction to the bathtub acid incident says a lot. The gore freaks him out, sure, but listen to how he talks. He's horrified that they're even doing this, that this is what their choices have led to. He covers it with jokes and whining, but it's evident he still has a conscience trying to claw its way out. You see it again and again. He doesn't want to kill Crazy 8. He's rattled by the idea of murder long before Walt is. At the time, everyone just labels that as weakness or immaturity. To be fair, he is immature. But still, another missed opportunity to recognize that Jesse actually has a moral line. Watch how Walt responds to all of this. Every time Jesse shows awareness or decency, Walt reframes it as stupidity. Street smarts become "you're not thinking." Moral hesitation becomes "you can't handle this." It keeps the power imbalance locked in. Walt gets to be the mastermind, Jesse gets to be the mess. And that's where the gap starts to open. You, as the audience, are starting to notice that Jesse is more than his stereotype. The characters on screen, they double down on the stereotype. That disconnect is only going to get louder once Jesse starts being right about things that are way bigger than a bathtub full of acid. And Walt wastes no time weaponizing that gap. Walt's first alibi is not some genius chemical trick, it's social. It's narrative. He realizes really early on that if he just leans into the story everyone already believes about Jesse, he never has to look suspicious himself. Start with Skylar. The way he talks about Jesse to her is so careful it's almost surgical. He never says "my partner in a meth empire." It's always that vague former student, that guy I'm helping, that business partner who's into drugs. On paper it sounds responsible. Concerned teacher. Troubled kid. But think about it, every time Jesse comes up, Walt frames him as the corrupting influence. Jesse's the one with the RV. Jesse's the one with the drug problem. Jesse's the one dragging Walt into this. So when Skylar finally meets Jesse outside the house in season 2, the deck is already stacked. She doesn't see a traumatized addict begging for answers about Walt's lies. She sees exactly what Walt has been describing for months, the screw-up ex-student who's probably the source of all this chaos. The clue is right there in how fast she dismisses him. With Saul, it's even more obvious. Walt walks into that office and immediately sells Jesse as a liability. He calls him volatile, a junkie, unpredictable, always causing problems. This is while Walt is out here dissolving bodies in bathtubs and walking into Tuco's headquarters with homemade explosives. But here's the thing, Saul buys it, because it matches what he already thinks when he looks at Jesse. Low-level, emotional, not a planner. So when something goes wrong, Saul's first instinct is, what did Pinkman screw up this time? You see the same pattern in their arguments. A deal goes sideways, Jesse was high. Somebody almost dies, Jesse was careless. Jesse questions a plan, he's being emotional. Even when Jesse is right in the moment, Walt reframes the whole situation so that Jesse is the weak link. Hear me out, over time that repetition doesn't just convince Saul or Skylar, it starts convincing Jesse himself. And there's a strategic benefit baked into all of this. By painting Jesse as unstable and untrustworthy, Walt builds a human shield around his own image. If the quiet, family man chemistry teacher is partnered with a notorious burnout, who are people going to blame when things get suspicious? The guy who cries at sonograms, or the guy who shows up sweaty, shaking, and covered in dirt? To be fair, Jesse does actually spiral. He uses, he panics, he makes some terrible calls, but still, another missed opportunity for everyone around him to notice the pattern. The more Walt talks, the less credible Jesse becomes. And that early character assassination, that's not just flavor, it's setup. Because when Jesse finally tries to expose Walt to Hank and the Dia, all of this groundwork comes crashing down on him. He walks in with the truth, and they hear just another bitter, unreliable criminal ranting about Heisenberg. We'll get to that moment. But first, you have to see how the system around Jesse keeps choosing Walt's version of reality over Jesse's, even when the clues are staring them in the face. So when you watch Jesse finally walk into Hank's office, desperate to be believed, you have to rewind mentally to the first time he actually tried to live as someone worth trusting. That attempt doesn't start with Dia. It starts with a landlord named Jane. Jane as the landlord. That's the setup. Jesse moves into that duplex and instantly does what everyone expects of him. He lies. Diesel on the rental form, fake story about his job, the whole thing is a performance. On paper, he's just confirming the image his teachers and parents already stamped on him. Burnout, user, screw up. But here's the thing. He drops the act with Jane way faster than he does with almost anyone else. Think about it. It takes, a couple conversations before he's telling her his real name. Showing her his drawings, letting her see the kid who doodled in Mr. White's chemistry class instead of the criminal Walt recruits on that rooftop. The lie is the armor, but with Jane he immediately starts poking holes in it like he's testing. If I show you who I actually am, are you going to throw it back in my face? Then you get the NA meetings. This is Jesse's first real laboratory of honesty. He sits in that circle, slouched, half smirking, making jokes about his business. On the surface, it plays like deflection. But listen to what he's actually doing in those scenes. He's trying out sincerity in small doses, then yanking it back the second he feels exposed. When the group leader talks about self-acceptance, Jesse looks almost offended, like, "You accept me and then what?" You're just wrong. To be fair, the room doesn't exactly know what to do with him. He's obviously high at times, obviously not following the program, but still, another missed opportunity. The moment he opens up about killing Gale in that metaphor, you can see he wants someone to say, "I believe you, and you're not beyond saving." Instead, he leans into the idea that he's the bad guy because that's the role everyone already cast him in. Jane is the exception. She calls him an artist. She looks at his drawing of the beaker and gas mask and treats it like it's actually worth something. For a brief window, Jesse experiences what it's like when someone doesn't treat him as a permanent red flag. Inside that apartment, he's a boyfriend, a tenant, an artist. Outside, he's still the junkie kid the cops shove around. And the second Heron comes back into the picture, you watch that fragile trust implode. Jane, who has seen his better side, gets pulled into his worst one. The neighbors, the world, even her father when he finds them, they don't see a tragic love story. They see exactly what Jesse has always been labeled, a user dragging someone down with him. Hear me out. This is Jesse's first near miss at a new reputation. He almost proves to himself and to someone else that he can be honest and stable. But when Jane dies in that bed next to him, the story that survives isn't Jesse tried. It's Jesse kills everything he touches. And that narrative is going to make what happens the next time he reaches for help even harder to watch. The airplane crash. This is where Jesse's private shame quietly gets promoted to a cosmic disaster. And the cruel part is, nobody ever asks him what actually happened in that room with Jane. Go back to his breakdown after her death. The rehab center. The group circle. Jesse sits there, hollowed out, telling strangers that he killed the woman he loved because he let her choke. He doesn't know about Walt in the doorway. He has no clue about the real monster move that actually tipped the scale. All he sees is his own hand on the steering wheel. His version is simple: I used, she died, it's on me. Think about it. This is the one time Jesse is brutally honest about himself. No excuses, no bravado, no junkie patter, just raw grief and self-loathing. And even here, in a space literally designed for listening, his perspective is treated like another sad addict story in a long line of them. Tragic, sure, but not important. Then the sky falls. Literally, Jane's dad, shattered by his own guilt, goes back to work too early, makes one mistake, and two planes collide over Albuquerque. The show does something really suspicious here. It ties Jesse's quiet personal tragedy to a public horror that rains flaming debris on Walt's backyard, pink teddy bear, human remains, news coverage, the works. But here's the thing, in story terms, that crash sticks to Jesse like radioactive dust. He doesn't know the chain of events, but the audience does. We can draw a straight line: Jesse meets Jane, relapses, Jane dies, her dad spirals. Hundreds of people burn. To be fair, the actual responsibility is wildly more complicated than that. Yet symbolically, it's like the universe is co-signing Jesse's worst fear about himself, that his existence is destructive. And notice who never asks him anything. Not his parents, who are just relieved he's out of their house. Not the cops, who see him as low-level trash, not a meaningful witness. Not even Walt, at least not in any honest way. Walt checks on him, sure, but only to manage him, to steer the narrative away from the truth. Nobody says, Jesse, walk me through what happened to Jane. His account doesn't matter. His guilt is completely internal and completely unsupported by facts. That's the real red flag for what's coming. Jesse starts to believe that his instincts are cursed. Every time he follows his heart, someone dies, a city suffers, the sky literally explodes. So when he later gets that gut feeling about Walt and Brock, when his suspicion actually is the obvious clue everyone should chase, He's already trained to doubt himself first. Hear me out. The irony is brutal. The one time Jesse's paranoid read on Walt is dead on. His history of self-blame makes it easier for everyone, including Jesse, to write it off as another junkie spiral. But still, another missed opportunity. And the cost of that doubt is going to be way higher than a pink teddy bear in a swimming pool. Rehab is supposed to be the place where the truth finally matters. You strip everything down, confess your worst, and the room holds you accountable. That's the fantasy. Jesse walks into that circle and basically detonates it. The rehab confession. This is one of the clearest red flags about how the world processes Jesse. He raises his hand in group and admits, in detail, that he sold meth to a woman in recovery. Not just any client, but someone from that very program. He lays out the relapse, the overdose, the death. It's raw, it's specific, it's obviously self-incriminating. He's not spinning, he's not crying for sympathy. He's saying, I did this, I'm the bad guy. Now think about it. In any normal moral universe, this should be a social nuke. People should recoil. Someone should say, you can't be here if you're actively preying on addicts. At the time, Jesse is basically begging for the room to condemn him. He wants the punishment to finally match the crime. But here's the thing, the group leader doesn't punish him. He reframes it. He leans on this philosophy of radical acceptance, no judgment, focus on healing, not blame. On paper, that sounds compassionate. In practice, it tells Jesse that his confession is just another share, another story to be processed, not a clue that something is deeply, dangerously wrong. Hear me out. That's not just a missed ethical beat, it's another missed opportunity to show Jesse that honesty can actually change his trajectory. The leader talks about self-forgiveness, about addiction as a disease. All true, all nuanced, but still, another missed opportunity to draw a hard line between harm you suffer and harm you cause. So what does Jesse learn? He learns that even when he tells the truth about being a villain, people will either over-forgive or underreact. His words don't trigger consequences, they trigger platitudes. The more honest he gets, the more abstract the response becomes. It's like the system hears him, but doesn't really listen. It just processes. And that's the pivot. Jesse leans into the role. If the room won't treat I'm the bad guy as a real moral statement, he'll treat it as an identity. You can see it on his face, this is who I am, this is all I'll ever be. His belief that his words can lead to meaningful change erodes right there in a circle of folding chairs. From a trust angle, that's brutal. When your most honest confession lands with a therapeutic shrug. Why would you ever believe that telling the truth matters? Why risk it with cops, with family, with anyone? And that seed is going to sprout later, because when Jesse finally drags himself to Hank and the Dia, trying again to confess, he's walking in with this rehab lesson burned into his brain. Systems don't really hear you. They just file you under junkie, run the script, and move on. And the cartel world? It runs on that same script. Enter Gus and Mike. Professional criminals, amateur psychologists. They don't need Jesse's full file to slot him into a role. They take one look at him, hear addict, dropout, small-time dealer, and the verdict is basically pre-written. Start with Gus. The first impression is brutal. Walt wants a meeting, wants to sell his genius, and Gus's people report back that the partner is using. Right away, Gus refuses. He won't even be in the same room as Walt while Jesse's high. That's not just about safety, that's a value judgment. In Gus's head, a junkie in the lab is a walking red flag, proof that Walt doesn't understand serious business. Think about it. Gus is willing to buy meth through a volatile maniac like Tuco by proxy, but Jesse being high? That's the line. To Gus, Jesse isn't a person to evaluate, he's a type. Unreliable, sloppy, beneath a professional operation. Mike's first read is just as dismissive, but a little funnier in how obvious it is. The way he talks to Jesse in those early scenes, you can hear it. Jesse is noise. A problem to be managed. Mike cleans up after the ATM incident, he watches Jesse spiral, and he never once treats Jesse's instincts or testimony like they could be useful in a real crisis. If Jesse says something suspicious, Mike's first assumption is that Jesse's high or confused, not that he might actually be onto something. But here's the thing, the cartel run in season 4 cracks that image, at least a little. Mike drags Jesse down to Mexico as expendable muscle. Gus sees him as leverage over Walt. Nobody is expecting heroic under fire. Then the ambush hits. Bullets everywhere. And Jesse, the guy everyone filed under emotionally compromised, follows Mike's lead, keeps his head, and helps clear the shooters. That's the turning point. Mike starts to respect him as someone who can handle pressure. Gus promotes him to cook solo. On paper, Jesse has finally proven himself, but still, another missed opportunity. They mostly upgrade him from liability to useful tool, not to trustworthy equal. To be fair, part of that is Walt's design. Walt keeps feeding Gus and Mike this picture of Jesse as unstable, easily manipulated, always on the verge of relapse. And they buy it, because it fits their first impressions. Hear me out. That bias blinds them to the one thing Jesse is actually best at by this point. He understands Walt's darkness. Jesse is the only one really watching Walt's face when Brock gets sick, when Gale dies, when any line gets crossed. He feels the pattern before he can fully explain it, but by the time he starts putting the clues together, everyone in power has already locked in their verdict. Jesse is emotional, damaged, not fully reliable. So when he finally does try to scream the truth about Walt, the stage is perfectly set for everyone to miss it, and the next time Jesse's instincts start ringing alarm bells, the person who ignores him will be the last one you'd expect. So when Jesse's instincts start ringing again, Walt has a backup plan ready, not just a lie, a whole character profile. And he spends seasons 3 and 4 quietly feeding it to Gus and Mike, the story. That's what Walt is really cooking here. To them, Jesse isn't a traumatized kid trying to survive. He's the junkie. He's the screw-up. And every time Jesse does something competent, Walt rushes in with a fresh red flag to keep that story intact. Think about it. Jesse nails the RV cook with Gus's guys, proves he can handle the lab, even shows up on time. What does Walt tell Gus? That Jesse's using again, that he's unpredictable, that he can't be trusted with responsibility. It's always right after a win. Jesse survives the shootout with the dealers. Walt frames it as proof Jesse is volatile. Jesse wants to kill the 2 dealers to protect the kid. Walt sells it as emotional instability, not loyalty. Here's the thing, Walt doesn't just report Jesse's behavior. He engineers it, he pushes Jesse into volatile situations, then steps back and points at the explosion. He stokes Jesse's rage about the dealers, then uses that rage as Exhibit A. He isolates Jesse from Jane's memory, from his parents, from anyone who might ground him, and then shrugs when Jesse spirals, like, see? Can't control him. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a hazmat suit. And Mike buys it. To be fair, from Mike's angle the clues look obvious. Jesse's late, he's high, he's lashing out. But here's the thing Mike misses. Walt is usually the one narrating what that behavior means. When Jesse tries to step up, Walt quietly moves the goalposts, making sure the official version of events always paints Jesse as the weak link. Problem Dog is the smoking gun for this whole dynamic. Jesse goes to NA and basically confesses to killing Gale. He frames it as a metaphor about a dog he put down, but you can hear the guilt ripping him apart. That's not weakness, that's a functioning conscience trying to claw its way back. But when Walt hears about Jesse's guilt, he treats it like a liability, something to manage, not something to respect. Mike does the same. They turn a moral crisis into a performance review. Pattern interrupt. Imagine if Gus had heard that share. Imagine Gus seeing a killer who actually feels bad about killing. Does that make Jesse more or less dangerous? Hear me out. Walt can't risk that question even being asked. Because this campaign benefits Walt in one very specific way. If Gus ever has to choose who to believe in a conflict, the deck is already stacked. On one side, you've got Walter White, quiet family man, cancer patient, professional chemist. On the other, Jesse Pinkman, visibly traumatized junkie with a documented history of unpredictable behavior. Whose story sounds like the obvious lie? By the time Jesse eventually starts telling the truth about Walt, it won't matter. Walt isn't just cooking meth, he's cooking the books on Jesse's soul, rewriting Jesse's public character sheet so thoroughly that any future truth Jesse tells is pre-labeled as delusion. And the cruel part? The more Jesse fights that label, the crazier he looks. Which sets up the next phase of Walt's plan. turning Jesse's last remaining strengths into weapons against himself. So when Walt finishes shredding Jesse's reputation, you get this brutal irony. The first time Jesse's moral compass really locks in, nobody even knows it happened. The ATM house. This is the first big clue the show gives you that Jesse is not the monster everyone thinks he is. He walks into that place high, cocky, ready to rob a couple tweakers. Then he sees the kid. Filthy, hungry, blank stare glued to the TV while his parents get high in the next room. And you watch the bravado just drain out of him. He feeds the kid. He calls him little man. He tries to shield him from the chaos. While mom is screaming and dad is threatening him with a shotgun, Jesse's priority quietly shifts, get the kid safe. Think about it. This is a guy we met face first on a neighbor's roof, pants around his ankles, running from the Dia. And in this absolute hellhole, he draws a line he will not cross. Then the ATM crushes the dad's head. It's gruesome, it's shocking, but here's the thing. Jesse doesn't grab the stash and run. He calls the cops. Anonymously, sure, but he calls. He wipes his prints, walks the kid outside, tells him to wait for the nice officers. He even tries to make it sound like an adventure, because he knows this kid is already ruined enough. How does law enforcement see it? A drug house. A dead junkie. A traumatized child. Case closed. The report probably reads like 100 other meth lab tragedies. No one asks, who called this in so fast? Who made sure the kid was outside? To be fair, from their angle it's just another crime scene, but still, another missed opportunity to notice that somewhere in this mess, a so-called junkie tried to do the right thing. Cut to Andrea. NA meeting. Jesse shows up under an alias, lying about who he is, why he's there, what he's done. Classic Jesse move at the time. But when he meets Andrea and hears she has a son, Brock, something shifts again. The tough guy posture drops a little. He starts buying Brock presents, hanging out, trying to be the fun but safe adult he never had. This is one of the rare stretches where Jesse actively tries to be trustworthy. He lies less. He shows up more. He actually cares about being a good influence, even while he's still neck deep in Walt's world. But Andrea's not stupid. She lets him in, yet you can feel that limited trust. She side-eyes the late nights, the bruises, the cash he can't explain. She believes in the version of Jesse who plays video games with Brock, not the one the streets whisper about. And that gap? That's exactly what will kill her. Hear me out. Jesse's bond with Andrea and Brock becomes the perfect leverage point. When the cartel, then Walt, then Todd's crew need to control him, they don't go after his money or his pride. They go after the only people who ever started to see past the dangerous loser label. And when Jesse finally screams the truth about that manipulation, almost no one believes him at first. It just sounds like what it's always sounded like, a junkie freaking out. The tragedy is, by the time the world realizes he was right, his moral compass has cost him everything. And the next time Jesse tries to tell the truth, he's not just ignored, he's weaponized. Gail's apartment. This is where Jesse's reputation as the dangerous loser collides with something much scarier. The fact that he's now more morally awake than Walter. He pulls the trigger, he stares at Gail's body. And from that moment on, Jesse is not the same guy. He's not bragging about it, he's not shrugging. He's shattered. The show makes it obvious. He's dissociated at the lab, he can't sleep. He's zoning out with that dead-eyed stare while Walt keeps talking about victory and buying us time. Think about it. Jesse keeps saying it out loud. I killed a man. He goes to NA and basically confesses in code. He tells the group he did something unforgivable and that he doesn't want to feel better because he deserves the pain. That's not a junkie story. That's someone trying, in the only safe space he has, to tell the truth about what he did. Meanwhile, look at Walt's version of the same event. To him, Gail's death is a move, a tactic. He frames it as part of their war with Gus, a necessary evil on the chessboard. When Jesse spirals, Walt's reaction isn't guilt, it's annoyance. Jesse's breakdown is a problem to manage, not a wound they share. That split is the clue. Jesse sees a murder, Walt sees a strategy. Here's the thing. Inside, Jesse is actually more honest than Walt now. His self-story is brutal but accurate. I'm a murderer. I did something I can't take back. Walt's self-story is a lie dressed up as logic. We had no choice. It had to be done. One of them is facing what happened. One of them is hiding behind the word necessary. But how do Mike and Gus read this difference? As weakness, as instability. Mike watches Jesse at the lab, at the meetings, in the car. From his angle, the kid's twitchy, reckless, clearly using. To be fair, Jesse is using. But Mike and Gus never stop to ask the obvious follow-up. If this guy is so wrecked by killing one person, what does that say about his conscience? Instead, it becomes another missed opportunity. Jesse's guilt, which could be a sign he's the one person in this operation who might actually tell the truth when it counts, is treated as a red flag that he can't be trusted with anything important. The calm one, the rational one, the man who can talk about Gale's execution like a business decision, that's the guy they consider reliable. But here's the thing, in any sane world, the person losing sleep over what he's done is the better long-term bet than the guy sleeping like a baby. Breaking Bad flips that logic. In this universe, guilt is suspicious, and the real sociopath is professional. And once you see that inversion, you're ready for the next big test. Because when a little boy named Brock gets sick, and Jesse's instincts start screaming the truth about Walt, that same pattern kicks in again. Only this time, the stakes are even worse. The Brock poisoning. This is the big one. This is where Jesse's instincts finally line up perfectly with reality, and the show still teaches him not to trust himself. Walk through what actually happens. Brock gets suddenly, mysteriously sick. Jesse's already on edge, already primed by Walt's little. What if Gus uses the ricin on a kid? Speech, then he reaches for his pack, realizes the ricin cigarette is missing, and you can see it hit him like a truck. The pattern snaps into place. Kid in the hospital, missing poison. The one person with motive and access. This is not some wild, drug-fueled rant. Think about it. Jesse does what a good investigator would do. He checks his pockets, rewinds his recent interactions, and realizes the only time that cigarette could have disappeared was when Huel lifted it. That's sharp pattern recognition under extreme stress. He's not hallucinating, he's connecting clues. So he drives straight to Walt's house. No stalling, no hemming and hawing. He kicks the door in, throws Walt to the floor, and puts a gun in his face. And listen to what he says. He's not babbling. He lays out a clear, evidence-based accusation. The missing cigarette, Brock's symptoms, Walt's earlier warning, the timing. It's focused, coherent, and it comes from someone who knows exactly how far Walt is willing to go. But here's the thing. The second Walt starts talking, you can feel Jesse's certainty start to wobble. Walt doesn't argue the facts, he attacks Jesse's relationship to the facts. He leans into that junky image, that long history of everyone treating Jesse as unstable. You're thinking crazy, you want to believe this because you hate yourself, all that gaslighting language. He reframes a logical chain of clues as just another emotional outburst. And to be fair, the world has already done half the work for him. Jesse's parents, the cops, even guys like Mike have spent seasons treating him as the least reliable narrator in any room. So when Walt calmly redirects blame onto Gus, spins this elaborate story about manipulation and planted ideas. It fits right into the existing narrative. Of course, the twitchy burnout is overreacting, and of course, the meek family man is just trying to protect him. Here's your meta-irony. You, the audience, know Jesse is right. You've seen the lily of the valley plant. You know Walt staged the entire thing. Inside the show, though, every power structure, from Walt's fatherly act to the cartel mythology about Gus, lines up to tell Jesse he's crazy. Pattern interrupt for a second. Imagine being right about the worst thing you can possibly imagine your mentor doing, and then being persuaded it's all in your head. That's the long-term damage. After Brock, Jesse learns that even when his gut is screaming the truth, he can be talked out of it. His own mind becomes a red flag he's trained to ignore. And that's exactly the kind of learned self-doubt Walt will cash in on the next time Jesse starts to see the real Heisenberg staring back at him. And that's exactly where the NA scene in Problem Dog hits you. Because this is Jesse doing the opposite of gaslighting himself. For once, he actually tries to say what he did. The meeting. The confession. On the surface, he's sharing about a dog he put down for no reason. But think about it. He describes this animal as harmless, as something that wasn't doing anything, just being there, and he killed it because someone paid him to. That's Gale, line for line, wrapped in a metaphor thin enough that you can see the outline of the real murder underneath. Jesse's not bragging. He's not playing the tough guy. His voice cracks. He keeps circling back to how wrong it was, how it wasn't the dog's fault. This is one of the only times in the show where he is actively trying to process his guilt instead of running from it. He's basically waving a giant red flag that says, I did something unforgivable. But here's the thing, he picked the worst possible audience. Look at how the group reacts. They nod, they validate, they talk about self-acceptance and letting go of shame. To be fair, they only know what he's telling them. At the time, I put down a dog sounds like some messed up but abstract story about cruelty and regret. So they do what the program trains them to do, remind him he's not a bad person, that he's more than his mistakes, that he has to forgive himself, and you can see on his face how wrong that lands. This isn't shoplifting, this isn't relapsing, this is a premeditated execution of a stranger who opened the door smiling. The whole point of Jesse's story is that maybe he is a bad person now. That maybe this act can't be spiritually sanded down into a lesson about growth. But the system can't handle that. It therapeutically defangs his confession. They take this incredibly specific, ugly truth and turn it into a generic recovery parable. It's comforting. It's also completely missing what he's actually admitting. That's another missed opportunity for someone to really hear Jesse, and it teaches him something brutal. Even when he's honest, people either punish him or dilute him. His parents throw him out. Walt weaponizes every vulnerability he shares. N.A. pats him on the back and tells him it's okay. Different reactions, same message. The truth doesn't land. So why would he ever trust that speaking up matters? Hear me out. When that's your history, you learn that opening your mouth is either dangerous or pointless. That belief is going to haunt every later interaction he has with Hank. Because one day, Jesse will finally sit across from people who can act on the truth, the Dia, the guy who's been chasing Heisenberg from the pilot. And he's not walking into that room clean. He's dragging in this whole backlog of missed confessions and shrugged off guilt, and that baggage is going to shape exactly how and how much he lets himself talk. And that baggage? Gus and Mike look at it and don't see a damaged witness. They see raw material, Gus's test, the dead drop run. On the surface, it looks like a field trip to clear Jesse's head. Mike drives him around, lets him feel useful, gives him a job that doesn't involve staring at a blue barrel in a lab. But think about it. Every stop, every wait in the car, every quiet look from Mike is a measurement. Will this kid follow orders, or will he crack? The stick-up. The so-called random robbery at the last pickup. This is the big clue that this whole thing is not just busy work. Mike vanishes, the guys with the guns appear, and Jesse is suddenly in the exact kind of chaos where historically everyone assumes he'll fall apart. Junkie, burnout, screw up. That's his file. Except he doesn't. He floors it. He improvises. He saves the stash, saves Mike's life, and then calmly drives back like he just finished a shift at the car wash. It's evident in that moment that Jesse can be cool under pressure, decisive, even brave. In literally any other story, those are the qualities that make someone a credible witness. You'd want to hear what this guy has to say about anything suspicious, right? But here's the thing. Mike doesn't respond by asking Jesse what he thinks. He responds by deciding what Jesse is good for. Suddenly, Jesse isn't the loudmouth liability Walt keeps complaining about. He's muscle. He's a tool you can point at a problem and trust to handle it. Mike starts to respect him, but it's respect with a ceiling. You can see it in how Mike talks around Walt, not with Jesse about Walt. He never sits Jesse down and says, "Alright kid, what's your read on Heisenberg?" Even when Jesse is clearly closer to Walt than anyone, even when the red flags are piling up, Brock's poisoning, Walt's constant crises, Mike treats Jesse's perspective as background noise. Useful instincts, useless testimony. And that's another missed opportunity. Hear me out. If Mike, the one guy in Gus's operation who actually has decent instincts about people, had taken Jesse seriously as a source instead of just a soldier, he might have heard the truth about Walt early. The lies about Gale, the the manipulation. The way Walt keeps engineering coincidences. The Heisenberg empire could have collapsed in a back office conversation instead of a lab explosion. To be fair, Gus and Mike aren't in the business of believing stories, they're in the business of controlling outcomes. But still, another missed opportunity. Walt wants Jesse's loyalty. Gus wants his obedience. Mike wants his courage. Nobody wants his version of events. And when someone finally does, when law enforcement actually sits him down and says, "Tell us everything about Walter White," Jesse's going to bring all of this conditioning into that room. The real question is, by that point, can he even tell the difference between being used and being heard? So when Gus puts them in that underground super lab, the show does something really sneaky with Jesse. On paper, this is the moment he levels up. State-of-the-art equipment, crisp yellow suits, a camera in the corner watching his every move. It looks like validation. But think about it. That camera isn't there to hear Jesse. It's there to control him. The lab setup. 2 cooks, 1 silent witness. Gus's surveillance system tracks everything that's obvious, how many batches, how pure, who shows up on time. It sees Jesse pacing, sees him dragging his feet, sees him staring at the floor. What it never captures in any way that matters is the stuff that actually defines him. The guilt over Gale, the fear of Walt, the suspicion that something about Brock is very, very wrong. On the monitors, he's just a body in a hazmat suit. Here's the thing, Jesse is never more visible in the series than in this era, and he's never less heard. Gus watches him, Mike watches him, Walt watches him. Even we as the audience are literally placed in the camera's POV sometimes, staring down at Jesse like we're part of the same system that doesn't trust him with a voice. And Jesse responds to that. His growing quietness in the lab isn't just depression, it's adaptation. Early on, he cracks jokes, complains, pushes back. By the time he's deep into the Gus operation, he barely speaks during cooks. He focuses on the work, on the ritual, on following Walt's instructions with robotic precision, as if he's learned that every word is either suspicious or useless. You can feel the shift. The kid who once shouted "Yay, science" now measures his sentences like they're contraband. To be fair, he has good reason. Every time he's opened his mouth in this world, someone has weaponized it against him. Walt twists his confessions. Gus tests his loyalty. Mike listens, but only long enough to decide whether Jesse is a liability. Pattern interrupt? Notice who nobody asks. For all those cameras, all that security, all those meetings in the laundry office, not one powerful man sits Jesse down and simply says, "What do you think is going on with Walt?" That's the bigger symbolism. The show is shouting at you, Jesse is always being seen but never truly listened to. His doubts about Walt, his horror at Gale's murder, his instincts about Brock being poisoned, they're all in there, but the system only records surface data. No one treats him as a reliable narrator of his own story. And that sets up a brutal irony. When Hank finally does try to hear him out, you're watching a guy who has spent seasons under a camera, trained to believe that being observed is not the same as being believed. He's a bomb that's been sitting in plain sight, labeled junkie sidekick, so everyone assumes it's a dud. But here's the thing, the lab will explode long before Jesse's truth does. The cameras will burn, the equipment will melt, the physical evidence will vanish in a fireball. Jesse's knowledge of Walt? That stays buried, unexploded, because nobody ever thought to trust the one person who saw everything and said nothing. Post-Gus, that unexploded truth bomb is walking around in an oversized hoodie. Jesse survives the lab explosion, and suddenly he's the most dangerous person in Albuquerque without even realizing it. Think about it. He knows Gus Fring's entire operation. The underground superlab, the cartel war, Walt's role in killing Gale, even the fact that this all started with a high school chemistry teacher cooking in an RV. If you wanted a single witness who could connect every suspicious thread in the Heisenberg case, it's Jesse Pinkman. But look at how fast Walt moves to defuse him. The night of the explosion, Walt doesn't just say, "We're free." He starts selling a story, partners, a new empire, the money they always deserved. At the same time, he keeps slipping in those little reminders. Jesse's relapse, Jesse's guilt over Gale, Jesse's history as the screw-up student who couldn't pass chemistry. It's this quiet 1-2 punch, you're essential, but you're also broken, so you need me. That's the pattern. The partnership pitch sounds empowering, but here's the thing. Every week conversation is wrapped around Jesse's worst insecurities. When Jesse hesitates, Walt brings up his parents kicking him out. When Jesse questions their choices, Walt pokes at his addiction or his guilt over Jane. The subtext is obvious once you see it. Who's going to believe you, Jesse? You're a junkie. You're a murderer. You're lucky I'm still here. Meanwhile, on the law enforcement side, you'd expect the DA to be all over this guy. Gus Fring is dead in a literal super lab. A blue meth cook clearly survived. And there's Jesse, with a known history as a manufacturer, documented connections to both Walt and Gus, and a track record of popping up around every major meth event in the city. Red flag after red flag. But still, another missed opportunity. Hank and the DA stay fixated on the myth of Heisenberg as this shadowy mastermind, some criminal unicorn out there. Jesse, at the time, he still filed under low-level trash. A street kid. A user. Someone you arrest, not someone you debrief. To be fair, Jesse does look like the last guy you trust with a coherent narrative, but that's exactly the bias the show is playing with. Hear me out. This is narrative sleight of hand, disguised as character judgment. The writers park the truth right next to the investigation and trust that both the characters and the audience will underestimate him the same way. Jesse sits in interrogation rooms, hospital waiting areas, rehab circles. He is constantly within arm's reach of people who could ask, what really happened? No one does, because it's Jesse. So when Hank finally does sit across from him in that infamous living room scene, it feels like a breakthrough. But once you zoom out, it's brutal. That conversation isn't just a clever twist, it's the bill coming due for seasons of people ignoring the one witness who could have ended this story years earlier. And the tragedy is, by the time anyone chooses to trust Jesse Pinkman, trusting him will cost them everything. So when someone finally does choose to trust Jesse, you expect that to be the turning point. The moment the universe stops treating him like a walking cautionary tale. Instead, the show does something twisted. It immediately cuts to Jesse at his absolute peak, and still nobody upgrades their opinion of him. The magnet job. This is Jesse's brainchild. Walt and Jesse are panicking about Gus's laptop in the police evidence room, and it's Jesse, the supposed burnout, who blurts out the solution, what about a magnet? At first it sounds dumb, cartoon logic. But think about it, he's intuitively doing physics in his head. Distance, field strength, battery power, all that stuff Walt used to lecture about in class. Jesse just weaponizes it in one sentence. Watch that planning scene again. Walt and Mike are arguing about lawyers and moles and inside men. Jesse is the only one actually problem solving. He drags them to the junkyard, pushes for bigger batteries, insists they test it, and when it works too well and slams the truck into the wall, he's the one who realizes that's exactly what they need. It's creative, it's technical, and it's fast under pressure. The clue is obvious, this guy is not dead weight. But here's the thing, look at how they react. Walt gives him that patronizing, good job Jesse tone, like he just answered a quiz question correctly. Mike calls him the kid and keeps treating him like a volatile tool. Saul literally makes jokes about magnets like it's some stoner shower thought. The idea that Jesse might be a genuine strategist? Another missed opportunity. Then you get the train heist. This is Jesse in full heist planner mode. He's the one obsessing over the timing, the pump, the exact volume of methylamine so the weight still matches. He's the guy saying no witnesses, no guns, no heroics. To be fair, everyone else is focused on the score. Jesse is focused on not dying and not killing anyone. During the robbery, when the truck stalls on the tracks and everything's about to go sideways, Walt freezes on the math and Todd stares like a golden retriever at a magic trick. It's Jesse who snaps them back, who barks orders, who rides that line between speed and control. He pulls off a literal moving train robbery with 0 casualties. On paper, that should erase the junkie screw-up label forever. But still, listen to how they talk about him after. Saul keeps cracking burnout jokes. Walt immediately reclaims the win in his own head, like it was all his genius. Mike still files Jesse under asset that occasionally surprises you, but needs babysitting. The disconnect is brutal. His actions scream reliable under pressure. Everyone's mental file still says liability. And hear me out, that gap is exactly what makes him so useful. The smarter and braver Jesse gets, the more valuable he becomes as the guy you can blame when things go bad. Which raises a darker question for the final stretch. What happens when the only person seeing the real danger is also the easiest one to ignore? Todd, the kid, and the shattering of Jesse's last illusions. This is where that useful scapegoat idea turns into something way darker. The train heist, the dirt bike, the raised hand. You remember the rhythm of that scene. It's playful at first, almost triumphant. They've just pulled off the most cinematic score of the series. No guns, no bodies, just chemistry and timing. Jesse is buzzing because in his mind, he finally did it. A perfect crime with a clean conscience. Nobody gets hurt. And then the kid waves. Todd waves back. And shoots him. Instant cut to Jesse's face. Pure horror. No calculation, no how do we cover this up, just this raw, stunned disbelief that the universe would do this to him again. Think about it, he built this whole plan around his one non-negotiable line. No deaths. He stacked the deck, micromanaged every step, because he still believed that if he tried hard enough, he could control the moral fallout. But here's the thing about that moment, it proves he can't. Not because he's incompetent, but because he's surrounded by people who don't care about the same lines. Watch the group reaction. Walt goes straight to rationalization mode. We can't undo this, we have to deal with it. It's cold, it's efficient, and it's him quietly signaling that the money and the meth come first. Mike, he's damage control. He's not happy, but this is just another mess to manage, another red flag he files away without letting it stop the operation. Todd is the real pattern interrupt. He's disturbingly calm, almost eager, treating the murder like he just swatted a fly that wandered into the lab. At the time, that calm looks like professionalism to Walt. To be fair, in cartel logic, Todd just removed a witness. But still, another missed opportunity to read what's evident. This guy has no brakes. Jesse is the only one who reacts like a human being. For him, the boy's death isn't a complication, it's an unforgivable line crossed. This isn't like Combo on the corner or Gale in the lab. This is an innocent kid on a bike who just happened to be in the wrong desert. When Jesse later screams that no one else gets hurt, it's not a new rule. It's him trying to resurrect a rule he thought he'd already enforced. And hear me out. This is the moment Jesse stops being just guilty and becomes actively oppositional. Inside this criminal crew, he's the closest thing you have to a moral protagonist. He wants out of the direction Walt is dragging them. He wants the killing to stop. But to everyone else, it just looks like Jesse being Jesse. Too sensitive, too unstable. Another emotional outburst from the guy who cries, panics, and throws money out of his car. What you and I see as a clear moral instinct, the people around him read as weakness. That's the trap being built. Every time Jesse is right, he looks less credible. And this boy on the bike is one of the last straws pushing him toward finally turning on Walt. The tragedy is already baked in when he does. All this history of overreacting will make his truth sound like just one more meltdown. So when he eventually walks into a DA office ready to talk, you can already feel the question hanging in the air. Are they going to hear a witness or just another junkie with a story? And that's where Mike should matter to you, because if everyone else is primed to see just another junkie with a story, Mike Ehrmantraut is the one guy in this world whose judgment actually cuts through the noise. Mike's exit. This is the quiet turning point that almost gives Jesse a clean slate. At the time you first meet them together with Mike tasing him, dragging him around, calling him a dumb kid. Jesse is evidence, a loose end, a problem to be managed. It's obvious Mike files him under liability and moves on. But watch how that file slowly updates. Think about it. In Season 3, when Gus wants Walt to keep cooking and Jesse's spiraling, Mike is the guy babysitting him, testing him. The dead drop pickups, the stakeouts, the long car rides where Jesse won't shut up about his criminal mastermind ideas. It starts as pure annoyance. Mike literally tells him he's not a real criminal. Then Jesse proves him wrong. The warehouse ambush with the cartel guy? Mike gets pinned, Jesse rams the car, saves his life, and then actually holds it together under fire. That's the first big red flag to Mike's old assessment. Suddenly this dumb kid can drive, shoot, improvise, and not completely fall apart. You can see it on Mike's face. This is not what he expected. From there, the trust builds in these small, easy-to-miss ways. Mike brings Jesse into the protection business. He lets him sit in on meetings. He starts explaining the game instead of just ordering him around. And when Walt is trying to poison Jesse against Gus, Mike is quietly doing the opposite, shielding Jesse from Walt's worst impulses by keeping them separated, giving Jesse structure, giving him work. Here's the thing. Mike doesn't hand out respect. This is a guy who's worked for Gus Fring, cleaned up cartel messes, and survived by assuming everyone's an idiot until they prove otherwise. So when he starts confiding in Jesse about wanting out, about the legacy money, that's huge. He's not just venting, he's testing whether Jesse might be someone you can actually bring along. He even considers it explicitly. The plan to take their share and disappear? Mike looks at Jesse as a possible partner in that exit, not as deadweight. To be fair, he still thinks Walt is the bigger brain. But he's starting to see Jesse as the better person, the one who might deserve a second chance. And that's why Mike's death hurts Jesse's reputation way beyond the emotional loss. Mike is the rare character whose opinion carries weight with both the audience and the criminal world. If he lives, he's the guy who could walk into a room with Hank or the Dia and say, "Listen to this kid. He's telling the truth." Imagine Jesse sitting across from Hank with Mike next to him, backing up every word about Walt, about Brock, about the bodies. But still, another missed opportunity. Walt kills Mike, and with him goes Jesse's only credible character witness. The one man actively updating his mental file on Jesse gets erased, and the only narrative left is Walt's, that Jesse is unstable, emotional, unreliable, hear me out. From this point on, every time Jesse tries to talk, he's effectively alone, arguing against the ghost of Heisenberg's version of who he is. And the story is about to show you how deadly that isolation becomes, because then the money shows up. The piles, the drums, the cartoon level cash that, in any other crime story, would feel like a victory lap. But look at Jesse's face in Season 5 when Saul spins that barrel lid and reveals the haul. He doesn't light up, he doesn't even really react. He just stares, like he's looking at a crime scene. The obvious reading is, wow, he's traumatized, but think about it, this is the moment where the reward stops feeling like a reward and starts feeling like a payoff to stay quiet. The money mountain. This is the first big red flag that something's broken past repair. Walt, Saul, everyone in that room treats the cash as closure, as proof that all the murder, all the lies, were worth it. Jesse hears the same pitch you do. You're rich now. It's over. Go live your life. But here's the thing. Every time Walt pushes that narrative, he's also pushing a subtext. You've been paid. So you don't get to complain. Watch how Walt frames it. He calls it partnership. He tells Jesse they're square. He acts like every bloodstained dollar is evidence of loyalty, shared success, almost a friendship trophy. It's subtle, but the implication is evident. If Jesse takes this money, he's agreeing that the past is settled. No more questions about kids on bikes, no more talking about Brock, no more revisiting Jane. To be fair, Walt never says this is a bribe for your silence, but the pressure is all over the scene. Take the cash, shut the door, shut your mouth. Jesse can't do it. So he starts trying to eject the money from his life like it's radioactive. First, he tries to give it to Kaylee and to the parents of the dead boy from the train heist. He literally sits there shaking, insisting they have to take it. It's not generosity, it's an exorcism. If they accept the money, maybe they'll also accept the guilt he can't carry anymore. When that fails, he escalates. The car ride with the duffel bags, the spinning manic drive through Albuquerque as he starts throwing bricks of cash out the window. It looks insane. Cops, neighbors, even we as viewers can read it as another Jesse meltdown. But still, another missed opportunity. The clue is that he's not rejecting wealth, he's rejecting the gag order attached to it. By the time he's wandering around handing stacks to strangers, it's obvious. He's trying to prove that his story matters more than Walt's payout. Hear me out. His refusal of the money is the first real betrayal Walt can't spin, because it breaks the unspoken deal the whole empire runs on. And that broken deal? That's exactly what Hank is about to walk into, thinking he's finally found a witness instead of a scapegoat. And that broken deal? That's exactly the headspace Jesse walks into when Huell fingers his pocket. The lift, the weed, the snap. It happens fast. 1 second, Jesse's this hollowed out guy, barely reacting to free money. The next, he's locked in, laser focused, in a way we almost never see. Think about it. A pickpocket trick that should just be a minor annoyance suddenly rips open the entire ricin mystery in his head. He looks at the pack, he realizes the baggie's gone. And then his brain does what nobody gives him credit for. It connects. Huell took his weed. Huell was with Saul when the ricin cigarette disappeared. Brock got poisoned right after. This isn't some vague stone hunch, it's a clean chain of custody drawn by a guy everyone still calls a burnout. Here's the thing about that meltdown in Saul's office. On the surface, it plays like classic Jesse, yelling, shoving, wild eyes, waving a gun around. Easy for people like Saul to write off as junkie paranoia. But you listen to the words, it's a coherent theory. He names the players, the timeline, the motive. He realizes Walt needed him back on his side. So Walt weaponized the one thing Jesse always blames himself for, hurting kids. For seasons, every bad thing involving a child got pinned to Jesse in his own mind. Combo's little brother, the kid on the bike, Brock. Walt just keeps feeding that story. At the time, Jesse bought it because it matched his self-image, screw up, poison, walking red flag. But in that parking lot, something flips. He stops asking, "What did I do?" and starts asking, "What did he do to me?" That's the real breakdown. Not the screaming, the reassigning of blame. Jesse finally sees that his self-doubt has been the tool. Walt didn't just lie to him, he curated Jesse's guilt, nudged it, used it as armor. And once Jesse spots that pattern, he can't unsee it. To be fair, it's terrifying how fast he gets there once he lets himself trust his own memory. Now put yourself in Walt's shoes for a second. A Jesse who thinks he's crazy, manageable, a Jesse who thinks he's evil. Even better, because he'll keep punishing himself instead of you. But a Jesse who realizes, calmly or not, that his instincts were right all along, that's a problem. Because suddenly, Jesse isn't just the liability. He's a credible narrator of Walt's crimes, if he can find one person willing to hear past the reputation. And you can feel the show pivot on that idea. The camera lingers on Jesse in that parking lot shaking, gas can in hand, not just because he's dangerous, but because he's finally clear. Pattern interrupt, the guy everyone treats like background noise decides he's the main witness. So where does a witness like that go? Not to Saul. Not to Skyler. He goes to the one man who's been chasing Heisenberg from the jump. Jesse's next move is straight to Hank Schrader's doorstep, hoping that for once, someone in authority won't miss the most obvious clue of all. Jesse Pinkman has been right about Walter White. Hank and Jesse in that interrogation room should have been the moment everything snapped into focus. The kid who's been dismissed as a burnout finally ready to spill, and the DIA agent who's been chasing a ghost finally handed the truth. On paper, this is the scene that ends the show. But think about it. Look at Jesse when Hank brings him in. He's not swaggering, not posturing. He's hollowed out. He's just thrown Walt's blood money out the window. He's realized that Brock poisoning wasn't some paranoid spiral, and he is completely done with Walter White's lies. At the same time, it's evident he doesn't actually trust the system he's walking into. Every authority figure in his life has either punished him or written him off. Why would this be different? Hank's approach doesn't help. He opens like a cop who finally got his big break, not like someone talking to a human being who's been terrorized for 2 seasons straight. To be fair, Hank does believe Jesse has real information. You can see him listening, connecting dots, getting that I've got Heisenberg glint in his eye. But here's the thing, he's still looking at Jesse as a tool. This is the same kid he once mocked as Captain Cook, the screw-up who supposedly sold pot to Walt. That contempt doesn't just vanish because the plot needs it to. Watch how Jesse responds. He doesn't just start ranting, he sets terms. He wants assurances, he asks about protection. He makes Hank acknowledge out loud how dangerous Walt really is. That's not a junkie meltdown, that's risk assessment. Jesse understands that once he talks, he's a walking red flag to the most vindictive man he's ever known. Hear me out. In this scene, Jesse is actually the clearest thinker in the room. And yet, The compromise they land on is tragic. Hank believes enough of Jesse's story to use it. He believes the clues about Walt's ego, his manipulation, the way bodies pile up around him, but still, another missed opportunity. Hank doesn't believe it deeply enough to center Jesse's safety. Instead, he and Gomez pivot almost immediately to strategy. Wire Jesse up, send him in, get Walt on tape. It's the RV stakeout all over again, just with higher stakes and less respect. You can feel the imbalance. Hank is treating this like the case of his career. Jesse is treating it like a potential death sentence. Hank's plan assumes Walt will talk, that they can control the situation, that Jesse is, frankly, expendable if it means nailing Heisenberg. From Hank's side, it's aggressive policing. From Jesse's side, it's just another powerful man willing to gamble with his life. And this is the meta punch. You, as the audience, know Jesse is finally telling the unvarnished truth. No spin, no self-serving edits. But inside the show, that truth gets filtered through Hank's agenda, the Diaz priorities, and years of people seeing Jesse as unreliable. Even his cleanest confession can't just exist as truth, it has to be weaponized. So when Jesse walks out of that room wired up, you're not just worried about Walt. You're worried about the fact that, once again, nobody in power really trusted Jesse Pinkman enough to protect him first and use him second. And while Jesse is walking out of that room wired up, thinking the tape is finally going to be his truth on record, Walt is already way ahead of him. The confession tape, but not Jesse's, Walt's masterpiece. You remember it, the calm, perfectly lit confessions video where Walter White, loving family man, sits down and admits to running a meth empire under the command of Hank Schrader. It's detailed, it's chronological, it's tailored to every institutional bias in the book. Cancer bills, Diaz salary, gambling debts, the cartel attack on Hank. Walt takes every real red flag in Hank's life and rearranges it into a story that feels obvious once you hear it. Here's the thing, nothing in that tape sounds like a junkie fantasy. It sounds like paperwork. It sounds like something an internal affairs officer could slide into a folder and go, this is at least worth looking at. Walt never raises his voice, never rambles, never slips into slang. He looks like every middle-class dad you've ever seen on the news saying, I just did what I had to do for my family. Now put that next to Jesse's way of talking. Emotional, fragmented, swearing every other sentence. He jumps in time, he doubles back, he gets stuck on details like Brock, Jane, the kid on the bike. Think about it, Jesse actually has the facts. He can name cooks, locations, timelines, the ricin, the train heist. But it doesn't come out in a straight line. It comes out like trauma, not testimony, and institutions are way more comfortable with clean lies than messy truth. To be fair, Jesse doesn't know how to perform for the camera. Walt does. Walt has years of practice playing the meek teacher, the embarrassed father, the guy who missed every clue about Heisenberg. So when Walt records that fake confession, he's not just protecting himself, he's poisoning the well. Any future tape from Jesse automatically looks like a defensive counterattack from the guy Hank supposedly recruited. So imagine you're the Dia, already thinking of Jesse as unstable, low-level trash. You see Walt's polished confession first. Then, later, you get Jesse on video, shaking, furious, calling Walt the devil, ranting about poison and magnets and Nazis. Which one feels more suspicious to you? Which one feels like a panicked attempt to dodge blame at the time? This is the asymmetry that destroys Jesse. Walt understands that people don't really trust truth, they trust stories that flatter what they already believe. Hank as the rogue cowboy, that fits. Jesse as the angry burnout lashing out, that fits even more. But Jesse still naively thinks that if he just says what happened, someone will finally go, wow, we really missed this guy. Hear me out. When Jesse finally realizes Walt has out-narrated him on tape, it doesn't just hurt. It detonates something. It pushes him toward that last desperate act of revenge he thinks will finally expose Walt once and for all. But still, another missed opportunity. Because even that move, the biggest one he ever makes, won't earn him the one thing he's been chasing the whole time. Real trust. And the way that plays out is brutal. The gasoline. The living room. Jesse Pinkman finally walks into Walter White's house, not as the screw-up sidekick, but as judge, jury, and would-be executioner of the entire lie. He's shaking. He's furious. But watch him carefully in that scene. This is not some random junkie spiral. He locks the door. He unscrews the cap. He walks room to room, splashing fuel on the carpets, the couch, the photos. He's targeting the shrine to Walt's fake life. Think about it. He's not just trying to burn a building. He's trying to erase the set where Walt has always played harmless family man. And yet, look at how the show has everyone interpret this move. Hank and Gomez see the aftermath and immediately clock the obvious. Jesse is both the biggest liability and the biggest opportunity they've ever had. On one hand, arson, drugs, mental breakdown energy, that's a prosecutor's nightmare. On the other hand, this is the one guy crazed enough and hurt enough to drag Heisenberg into the light. So what do? They don't treat it like a sane moral stand. They treat it like a tool. Hank literally films Jesse in that confession tape while still talking about him like a bomb that might go off in the wrong direction at any second. To be fair, from their angle, a guy who just tried to torch a suburban house is not exactly your dream star witness. But here's the thing. By the time Jesse walks in with that gas can, you know Walt has poisoned a child. You know about Jane. You know about Mike. You know every family man speech is a cover for mass murder and ego. So when Jesse screams that Walt can't keep getting away with it, the audience doesn't flinch away. It feels reasonable, terrifying, but morally understandable in a way Walt's calm never is again. Pattern interrupt. Rewind to season 1. Same visual, Jesse raging, Walt composed, and you'd almost automatically side with the calm middle-aged teacher. At the time, Jesse's volatility read as proof he was the problem. Now that same volatility feels like the only honest emotional response left in the show. Walt's composure? That's the real red flag. Hear me out. The trust inversion is complete in this moment. Early on, Walt's steady voice and scientific explanations made him feel credible, while Jesse's tears and outbursts made him easy to dismiss as unstable. Now, every time Walt lowers his voice and explains, it sounds like another trap. Jesse, screaming and shaking and ready to light a match, is the one person whose feelings line up with the horror we've actually seen. And that's the tragedy. Outside the screen, Jesse has finally become the character you trust most. Inside the story, this gasoline stunt just locks in everyone's belief that he's unreliable, dangerous, and broken. It's his clearest moral stand, and it gets filed away as more evidence that you should never listen to Jesse Pinkman. The next moves he makes will only push that gap wider. The desert. The ambush. This is where Jesse's lack of credibility stops being sad and starts getting people killed. We jump from the gasoline stunt straight into Hank's big move. Jesse finally does the unthinkable. He goes to the DA and tells Hank everything about Heisenberg. On paper, this is the moment the world should finally listen to Jesse Pinkman. But think about it. The plan they come up with is literally use Jesse as bait in the middle of nowhere and hope Walter White incriminates himself. Hank's calculus. This is important. Hank believes Jesse now, at least about the broad strokes. He's seen the money, heard the details, watched Jesse cry his way through confession. But here's the thing. He still doesn't see Jesse as a partner. He sees a tool, a lure. You can feel it in that motel room when Marie asks if Jesse will be safe, and Hank basically shrugs it off. To be fair, Hank is chasing the biggest case of his career, and he knows Walt is dangerous. But he drives Jesse out to the desert with a hidden camera and no real backup, fully prepared to let this traumatized ex-junkie stand 10 feet from the man who's ruined his life. That's not trust, that's leverage. Hank trusts Jesse's information just enough to weaponize it, but not enough to censor Jesse's safety. It's partial trust, and partial trust in this world is almost worse than none at all. Then you have Walt. From Walt's side, Jesse is no longer the kid he cares about. He's a traitor. A liability, someone whose story is so obviously damning that Walt doesn't even seriously consider fighting him in court. Why risk a jury hearing Jesse's full, coherent account of blue meth, RVs, Gus, and prison hits when you can just erase him? Hear me out, the most suspicious thing Walt does here isn't calling Jack. It's that he never once talks about discrediting Jesse's testimony. His instinct is murder, not legal strategy. That tells you exactly how much he fears Jesse's words and how little he values Jesse as a human being. And then Jack and Todd roll up. To them, Jesse isn't a witness, he's a loose end, a resource, a potential cook. Jack even pauses the shooting when Walt yells don't kill him, not because Jesse's story might blow up their operation, but because, hey, free meth chemist. Jesse's value is purely technical, not informational. What he knows doesn't matter. What he can produce does. The outcome is brutal. Hank dies in the sand. Gomez dies. Walt's empire survives for the moment. And Jesse, the one person who can narrate the entire Heisenberg saga from the ground level, ends up chained in the lab, his face swollen, his voice literally beaten and muzzled. Everyone brought him to that desert thinking he was bait. Nobody treated him as the key witness. And that's the last ugliest joke. The show locks away the only complete storyteller just when the truth finally could have mattered. Because after this, Jesse's words aren't just ignored, they're stolen from him. Because after this, Jesse's words aren't just ignored, they're stolen from him. The cage, the chain, the lab. You're not just watching a kidnapping, you're watching the final stage of Jesse Pinkman being turned into equipment. He's in that underground pit, filthy, starved, dog tethered to a track. When they haul him out, it's not to talk, not to negotiate, not to ask what really happened in the desert. It's to hose him down, strap him in, and make him cook. Think about it. For seasons, people treated Jesse like a screw-up, a burnout, a junkie. Now the Nazis strip even that messy humanity away. He's not the clown, not the liability, not the emotional kid. He's a resource. His entire world narrows to two options: obey and survive a little longer, or resist and die fast. The lab itself is the punchline. This is the same blue meth Jesse learned to perfect with Walt. The same product that once gave him a weird, prideful sense of identity. He was Captain Cook, the guy who actually knew the streets. Now that skill set is the only part of him they recognize as real. Jack's crew doesn't care that Jesse's the one person who could give a full, detailed account of Heisenberg from day one. They just care that the purity stays high. And here's the thing, that's the most brutal version of trust you can get. They trust his chemistry completely. They trust the numbers, the color, the crystal. But his words, his memories, his judgment about Walt, about Hank, about any of it, zero value. It's all the earlier dynamic with Walt, just without the fake fatherly speeches. Walt always trusted Jesse's talent and doubted his perspective. Jack just skips the acting and puts a chain on it. Then you get the photo. Andrea and Brock taped up inside the lab like a sick motivational poster. That picture is the entire tragedy of Jesse's character in one prop. His love for them is what once pushed him toward honesty, toward confession, toward trying to do the right thing. He wanted to come clean to Andrea. He wanted to be better for Brock. Now that same love is a weapon aimed at his throat. Every time he looks up from a beaker, he sees the cost of speaking. One wrong move, one attempt to scream the truth to anyone, and the only innocent people who ever believed in him die. It's an obvious red flag about this world. Sincerity doesn't just get ignored, it gets punished. So in this compound, you finally get the purest version of the show's trust economy. Jack's gang trusts product, not people. Output, not insight. A high purity percentage is worth more than the full story of Heisenberg. To be fair, they're not pretending otherwise. They never promise Jesse he'll be heard, they promise he'll be hurt. Hear me out though. When that chain eventually breaks and Jesse runs, he's not escaping as the kid who still believes that telling the truth might fix things. He's escaping as someone who has lived through the most extreme proof that his voice doesn't move the needle at all. And once you see him that way, the ambiguity of his ending stops being comforting and starts feeling like a question the show is daring you to answer. Because if the only honest chemist left finally gets free, but nobody ever really listens, what does freedom even mean? And that's the clue the finale quietly leaves you with, right before Jesse makes his last wordless choice: Andrea's murder. This is the moment the show stops hinting and just spells out the cost of Jesse Pinkman trying to be honest. You're back in that shabby little Albuquerque house. Night, quiet street. Jesse is chained in the lab, gag in his mouth, dragged to the barred window like an animal, and Todd, in that creepy polite voice, tells him they're going for a ride. Already a red flag. You know this isn't a favor. They pull up to Andrea's place. She opens the door and sweats, totally relaxed, trusting. She doesn't even see Jesse. He's outside in the truck, screaming into the gag, eyes bulging, because he knows exactly what this is. Todd says Jesse's name as if it's some casual check-in, and then, without build-up, without drama, he just shoots Andrea in the head on her own doorstep. No speech. No countdown. Just the message. Think about it, this isn't about Andrea at all. She never betrayed anyone, never played the game. Her only crime was believing Jesse could be good around Brock. She saw him cook breakfast, play video games, try to be responsible. She trusted him in a way almost nobody else on this show ever does. And the universe, or at least Todd and Jack's little universe, answers that trust with an execution. Here's the thing, for Jesse, this doesn't feel random. At the time, it feels like math. He tried to escape. He tried to talk. He tried one more time to act like his choices mattered, and instantly, the one person who treated him like he wasn't just a burnout or a junkie gets her brain blown out because of him. The clue he takes from that is brutal and very simple. His truth is a weapon pointed at anyone he loves. To be fair, Jesse already believed he was radioactive. Jane, Brock, even his little brother, who his parents keep away from him like he's contagious. But Andrea is different because she represents the version of Jesse that almost works. The caring boyfriend. The quasi-stepdad. The guy who shows up with groceries instead of meth. When she dies, it's like the show is saying, yeah, that guy? He doesn't get to live. So of course this reinforces his silence. After this, every attempt to speak out feels suspicious, like pulling a trigger. If he talks to Hank, people die. If he runs, people die. If he even lets himself care, people die. It becomes evident that the safest version of Jesse Pinkman is the one who shuts up, cooks, and stops believing his words can do anything except summon more horror. And hear me out. Once your capacity to trust is tied directly to a body count, what does trust even look like? If someone finally showed up and said, Jesse, we believe you, we'll protect you. Tell us everything, would he actually want to open his mouth? Or has Andrea's blood already answered that question for him? So when you finally get to Felina, Jesse's silence has basically become a survival strategy. Words got people killed. Trust got people killed. And now the only thing left to do is drive a car through a fence and hope the chain finally snaps. The massacre. This is Walt's last magic trick. He pops that trunk, the M60 swings out, and Jack's entire crew gets mowed down in seconds. It's loud, chaotic, bodies dropping everywhere while Jesse is literally chained to the floor like an animal. Think about it, every other time guns came out around Jesse, he was powerless. Combo, Gale, Drew Sharp, Hank and Gomez, he watches people die and can't do anything. This time, the bullets are actually his way out, and then the dust settles. Jack is crawling, Todd is gasping, Walt is bleeding from the side. In the middle of that, you get the tiny, almost easy to miss clue that matters most for Jesse. Walt slides the pistol across the floor and basically says, do it. He's not just giving Jesse a weapon, he's giving him a script. Be the Avenger, be the executioner. Give the audience the revenge they're obviously waiting for. But here's the thing, Jesse doesn't bite. He sees Walt is already hit. He sees the blood. He sees that this man, who once felt invincible, is already dying. And you can almost feel Jesse's thought process. If I pull this trigger, whose story am I finishing? Mine or his? So he does the most suspicious, out-of-character thing for the old Jesse Pinkman. He refuses. He drops the gun, tells Walt to do it himself if that's what he wants, and walks away. To be fair, every external force in Jesse's life has trained him to think justice equals violence. His parents wrote him off as a burnout. Walt groomed him to believe that real men pull the trigger. Even Hank only trusted him once there was leverage and a wire involved. But in this moment, Jesse finally stops outsourcing his morality. Killing Walt won't bring back Andrea. It won't unpoison Brock. It won't erase that pit in the desert or the confession tape or any of the times he was used as a human shield. Hear me out. That tossed gun is actually a tiny exchange of trust. Walt, for once, doesn't manipulate Jesse's choice, he just offers it. And Jesse, for once, doesn't act like the monster Walt has always implied he is. He proves Walt wrong by not shooting him. It's a quiet victory. No witnesses, no applause, no Dear report praising his courage. In a world that never trusted Jesse Pinkman, the finale gives him one last test, and he finally trusts himself enough to walk out the door alive. The question is, once he's free, what does a guy who's only ever been seen as a screw-up do with a moral compass no one else believes in? El Camino answers that question in the harshest way possible. Freedom doesn't magically fix Jesse's life, it just upgrades his cage. Now the bars are legal, social, and psychological. The situation. Jesse's out of the compound, but he's not free. He's a fugitive, plastered all over the news as Heisenberg's right-hand man. The media calls him a key player in the empire, a wanted accomplice, an armed and dangerous meth cook. Almost no one mentions that he was chained like an animal. Think about it, we watched him be tortured, but the world only sees the mugshot and the fireball where Walt's lab used to be. And that public story matters. It means every cop, every neighbor, every old acquaintance now has a simple narrative in their head. Jesse Pinkman, criminal scum who finally got what was coming to him. To be fair, his past doesn't exactly scream wrongfully imprisoned honor student, but still another missed opportunity for nuance. Look at how people treat him when he reaches out. Skinny Pete and Badger help him, sure, but even they are stunned into silence when they see the scars. They don't ask for his side of the story, they just know it must have been bad. The fear is evident, not fear of Jesse hurting them, but fear of how radioactive his existence has become. Just being near him is a red flag. Then you've got the other category, people who smell profit. The welders, Candy, the guys tied to Todd. They don't see a victim, they see a payday. Jesse shows up desperate and haunted, and their first instinct is to squeeze him for cash or power. Nobody asks, "What happened to you?" They ask, "What can I get out of you?" It's the same old pattern from Breaking Bad, just louder. His pain is background noise. The clearest version of this is Ed the Disappearer. Hear me out, because this scene is brutal. Jesse finally finds the one man who can give him a clean slate. You might expect some kind of moral conversation, right? Some acknowledgement that this kid has been through hell? But here's the thing. Ed does not care about Jesse's truth. At all. The only thing that matters is the transaction. Do you have the money? Are you serious about vanishing? Prove it. Jesse literally begs, tries to explain the Nazis, the cage, the torture. Ed shuts it down. Not because he's cruel for fun, but because in his world, stories are a liability. Emotion is noise. It's another missed opportunity for anyone to actually listen to Jesse Pinkman. So the theme continues. Even in his epilogue, Jesse's version of events is ignored. The world moves on with a simplified headline villain that doesn't match what you, the audience, know. To survive, he has to lean into that silence. Alaska is the payoff to that silence. It's a tragedy and a liberation at the same time. He finally gets a chance to be someone new, but only by killing the part of himself that spent years begging to be believed. The question is, once he's buried Jesse Pinkman, who exactly is left to live this new life? So when Jesse drives off into that Alaskan sunrise, it feels earned, tragic, cathartic. But think about it, the show has also just pulled a long con on you. For seasons, it quietly trained you not to trust this guy. Visually, it starts right away. Look at how the camera treats Jesse versus Walt and Hank. Walt in the classroom, locked off, centered, calm, Hank at the D, clean coverage, clear eye lines, fluorescent stability. Jesse, he's handheld chaos. Shaky cams when he's high, blown out party lighting, cluttered frames where he's half obscured by smoke or junk. On a gut level, that language tells you whose version of reality feels reliable and whose feels distorted. You don't sit there thinking, oh yes, the cinematography is undermining his credibility, but here's the thing, your brain still logs it. The jokes seal it. Jesse is the punchline long before he's the conscience. Everyone gets in on it. Walt calls him a burnout, a junkie, a moron. Hank mocks Captain Cook like he's the world's dumbest criminal. Even Saul treats him like a walking screw-up with a beanie. And the show invites you to laugh along. Those insults are written with rhythm, timed for comedy. You chuckle, you quote the lines, and without noticing, you internalize the bit. Jesse is the clown, the guy you don't take seriously. Then, the structure quietly weaponizes that. We're usually ahead of Jesse on information. We see Walt make the rice and cigarette switch. We watch him spin lies about Jane, about Brock, about Gus. So when Jesse doesn't get it yet, he looks slow. Naive? Another missed opportunity, right? But he's not missing the clue. The show is just letting you sit in Walt's omniscience while Jesse is being actively deceived. To be fair, if someone was rewriting your reality in real time, you'd lag too. Pattern interrupt for a second. Go back to the scenes where Jesse is actually right. He's suspicious of Walt after Jane's death. He's convinced Walt poisoned Brock. He tells Hank and Gomez that Walt is the devil. On paper, those are dead-on assessments. But because the visual language has coded him as unstable, and the dialogue has branded him an idiot, even you might have had a tiny is he overreacting? Reflex, that's not just character bias, that's design. And that's what makes the reversal so strong. By the time Jesse starts being right about Walt, you've spent years underestimating him. Your shift mirrors Hank's, Skyler's, even Saul's slow realization that the junkie kid was the one trying to pull the emergency brake. Hear me out, Jesse's story isn't only about guilt and redemption, it's about how hard it is to crawl out from under a story once it's been written about you. The next step is seeing how every major player uses that story as cover, and how Walt turns Jesse's bad reputation into his favorite murder weapon. Missed opportunities, the 5 times trusting Jesse, could have changed everything once you see Jesse as the guy trying to pull the emergency brake. You start spotting all the exits everyone blows past. The signs were there from the very beginning of the show, hiding in plain sight, but still. Another missed opportunity shows up in almost every season. The first one? The very start. The RV cook. Jesse is the one saying, "Yo, this is Tuco level dangerous. This world will chew you up." He wants to stay small time, keep distance from serious players, and he constantly warns Walt about stepping to people like Tuco, then later Gus. Think about it. If Walt had actually trusted Jesse's street read, instead of treating him like a dumb kid, they probably never end up in Gus's super lab, never on the cartel's radar, and maybe Walt just washes out as a mid-level cook with a fake name and some cash. Jesse's cowardice is really risk assessment. Walt hears it as weakness and plows past every red flag. Second, Brock, the cigarette, the ricin. Jesse's paranoia looks messy, but his instinct is dead on. He knows, deep down, that Walt is capable of using a child as leverage. He says it out loud, multiple times. To Saul, to Walt, to himself. But here's the thing. Everyone has already filed Jesse under unstable addict. Saul assumes he's spun out. Mike is focused on getting out clean. Even Jesse doesn't fully trust his own gut because Walt has spent seasons telling him he's wrong. If anyone had taken that suspicion seriously, Walt's playbook gets exposed before the Superlab era fully matures, and Heisenberg dies as a mid-season villain instead of a legend. Third, the NA meetings. Jesse sits in that circle and basically confesses to Gale's murder in everything but name. The way he describes the victim, the timing, the self-loathing, it's weirdly specific. It's not a vague "I hurt someone," it's a detailed emotional crime report. To be fair, the group is trained to hear pain, not clues. They're not cops. But still, another missed opportunity. If even one person had thought, this sounds like an actual homicide, and quietly tipped off authorities, Gale's murder could have been a straight line to Walt's door, lab notes and all. Fourth, Hank's interrogation. After the money-throwing meltdown, Jesse finally tries to flip the script. Hank believes him, but not enough. Hank uses Jesse as bait, wires him up, dangles him in front of Walt, and drags him into that desert showdown. Hear me out. If Hank had prioritized Jesse's safety and testimony over the big cinematic sting, he could have locked him down, built a case, and maybe never given Jack's crew a target. No desert shootout, no rise of the neo-Nazi empire, no chain reaction that ends with Hank in that grave. And last, post-escape. In El Camino and the aftermath, the world still wants Heisenberg as the mastermind and Jesse as his eager sidekick. The narrative is too clean, too satisfying. If law enforcement and the public had been willing to see Jesse as a coerced victim, as someone caged and tortured into cooking, his legal fate looks completely different. The Heisenberg myth gets rewritten as a story about manipulation, not genius. All 5 moments share the same pattern. Jesse tells the truth, or at least the closest thing he can manage, and nobody updates their beliefs. His lack of credibility isn't just a character flaw, it's a structural failure. And Walt learns to weaponize that failure, which sets up the darkest choice Jesse ever makes in the next part of his story. So here's the twist the show pulls on you without ever putting it in neon. By the time you hit the late seasons, Jesse Pinkman might actually be the most morally trustworthy person on the board. Think about it. Walt starts as the sympathetic family man and ends as a guy who can watch a child die and turn it into leverage. Jesse starts as the clown, the burnout, the guy who cooks meth in his aunt's house. But his arc doesn't bend toward power, it bends toward conscience. Every time Walt rationalizes one more atrocity, as for the family, Jesse moves in the opposite direction. From careless harm to obsessive, almost crippling remorse. Look at their trajectories side by side. Early Jesse lets Combo deal near a playground, he doesn't think it through. When that choice leads to a kid on a bike getting murdered, the guilt almost destroys him. He spirals, he dissociates, he can't pretend it's just part of the game. Walt, standing in the same world, turns that horror into a business problem to solve. Jesse's sleepless nights are a red flag that his moral compass is still alive, even if it's shaking all over the place. Now compare that to Hank. Hank's brave, no question. He'll run at gunfire while other people duck. He believes in the job. But he's also ego-driven and locked into his own narrative about who's dangerous and who's pathetic. At the time, Hank can't see Walt as a suspect because Walt doesn't fit his mental picture of a kingpin. Jesse, by season 5, is the exact opposite, hyper-attuned to collateral damage, painfully aware that his instincts have been wrong before, and actually willing to say, out loud, I was wrong. How often do you see Hank admit that without being forced? Then you've got Saul. Saul is all angles, all the time. Every conversation is a negotiation, every confession is a plea deal in disguise. He's pragmatic and proudly amoral. But here's the thing, the deeper Jesse gets into this world, the less he wants that. He starts rejecting the clever solution if it means lying one more time. When he refuses to keep Walt's blood money and starts throwing stacks of cash onto random lawns, that's not just a breakdown. That's his conscience physically rejecting the payoff. To be fair, from the outside it looks irrational. It looks like a junkie wasting a miracle. But if you actually track the clues, Jesse's instincts are consistently pointing toward decency, even when it costs him everything. He begs to get out. He begs Walt to stop. He tries to confess to Andrea. He goes to Hank in season 5, ready to burn his own life down just to stop Walt. That's not strategy, that's moral triage. So hear me out. By the end, the audience trusts Jesse more than almost anyone else in the show. Adia doesn't. His parents don't. Walt certainly doesn't. But you do. The junkie screw-up quietly becomes the moral anchor of Breaking Bad. And the cruel part? The moment Jesse finally becomes truly trustworthy is exactly when trusting him becomes the most dangerous move anyone can make. So if Jesse ends up being the moral anchor, whose fault is it that nobody treats him like one? How much of that junkie screw-up label is on him? And how much is the world deciding who he is before he even opens his mouth? Let's start with Jesse's side of the ledger. The guy does earn some of his bad press. Early on, he's using, dealing, skipping out on responsibility. He lies to his parents, he lies to Jane, he lies to Walt. When his parents try to help, he trashes the house. When he's in rehab, he jokes, he deflects. He plays into the clown role because it's easier to be the burnout than the disappointment. Think about it. He literally shows up at school parent-teacher conferences high. That's not exactly building a case for trust me, I've changed. And he knows how to weaponize that image. When it suits him, he leans into the junkie act to dodge questions, to get sympathy, to get out of trouble. That party house in season 2? That's Jesse performing the stereotype. Chaotic, loud, self-destructive. It's self-sabotage with a soundtrack. So to be fair, people don't just invent their doubts about him out of thin air. But here's the thing. Once Walt enters the picture, Jesse's reputation stops being just fallout from his own choices and becomes a tool. Walt systematically turns Jesse's worst traits into cover. To Gus and Mike, Walt keeps calling Jesse unstable, emotional, a liability. He tells them Jesse can't be trusted with responsibility, even as he's quietly steering Jesse into more and more dangerous tasks. When Brock gets poisoned and Jesse finally connects the dots, Walt gaslights him so hard it's almost surreal. He hugs Jesse, cries, and flips the script. Suddenly, it's all Gus, all paranoia, and Jesse's very real instincts are dismissed as grief and confusion. Pattern interrupt. Remember that moment when Jesse holds a gun on Walt in the lab, convinced about Brock? You're screaming, yes, listen to him, and the show makes you watch as Walt talks him down using the exact reputation the world stuck on Jesse. Unstable, emotional, overreacting, then you've got the institutions. Cops, D, even rehab. They look at Jesse and see low-level trash. A burnout kid from a nice family who threw it away. Hank uses him as an informant, but never really believes he's capable of bringing down someone like Heisenberg. The rehab system gives him the script about personal responsibility, but not much space to talk about the manipulative father figure cooking meth with him. At the time, everyone assumes the reliable narrators are guys like Walt and Hank. Jesse's just background noise. And that's the asymmetry. Jesse's mistakes hurt people, absolutely, but Walt and the institutions around him have the powers to define what those mistakes mean, how long they stick, and who gets forgiven. Walt can spin a story and walk back into his family's arms. Jesse tries to tell the truth to Hank in season 5 and gets turned into bait. So hear me out. Jesse contributes to his own reputation, but once men with badges and a genius with cancer decide what story he fits, his chances to rewrite it shrink to almost nothing. The real tragedy isn't that Jesse starts as untrustworthy, it's that by the time he actually becomes trustworthy, the system is already locked into seeing him as the perfect fall guy. And the show doesn't just stop there, it asks an even darker question. What happens when the only way out of that story is to become someone the world will finally fear instead of dismiss? So when the show asks that darker question, it's not hypothetical, it's Jesse's entire life. From the pilot to El Camino, he's trapped in one role, the liar who can't be believed, even when he's the only one in the room telling the truth. Think about it. At school, he's the burnout in Walt's chemistry class. At home, he's the bad influence who corrupts his little brother. On the street, he's the small-time screw-up who can't even cook without burning through a bathtub. That reputation is set in stone before Walt ever climbs through his bedroom window. So when Jesse later says Walt is a monster, everybody already has a mental file on him that says junkie, unreliable, probably exaggerating. That's pillar 1, the pre-existing stigma. The second pillar is way more active and way more cruel. Walt doesn't just fail to defend Jesse's credibility, he weaponizes the lack of it. He tells Gus and Mike that Jesse is unstable, a liability, someone who needs constant supervision. He plays up Jesse's emotional outbursts so that when Jesse finally snaps about things like Brock's poisoning, it looks like yet another meltdown instead of the most obvious red flag in the world. And then you have pillar 3, institutional bias. Cops, the D, even guys like Hank, they all read Jesse the same way. Low-level trash, a guy you flip for a quick bust, not someone who might actually hold the key to Heisenberg. When Jesse first sits in that interrogation room, he's not seen as a witness. He's seen as a punchline. To be fair, at the time he is lying about some things. But here's the thing, that early impression sticks so hard that when he finally walks into Hank's house in season 5 ready to burn Walt down, Hank still mostly sees bait, not a truth teller. Put those 3 together and you get the perfect scapegoat. Stigma, sabotage, and bias all lining up so that Jesse becomes the least believed person in a story he could have ended seasons earlier. And that's where the dramatic irony kicks in. You, the audience, start out laughing at this clown who can't get anything right by the time he's throwing money out of his car and sobbing in that folding chair at the Dia. You trust his instincts more than almost anyone else on the show. The characters around him, they almost never catch up. Hear me out. That gap is the point. Gilligan and the writers build Jesse's arc as a slow war against the story other people wrote for him. Every time he tries to rewrite it, confessing to Jane's dad, warning Andrea, turning on Walt. Someone with more power finds it more convenient to keep him in the box labeled screw up. So when he finally drives through that gate in El Camino, he's not just escaping the Nazis or Walt's empire, he's breaking out of the role of the guy nobody trusts. The cost is brutal though. Almost no one left alive will ever know how right he was about Walt, about Brock, about the bodies buried under all that blue. Which raises the final question the show leaves you with. If the truth depends on who's allowed to tell it, what happens to all the Jessies who never get out? Start with a mini marathon: Problem Dog, End Times, Confessions, Rabid Dog. Watch them like you're running an experiment. Anytime Jesse is clearly telling the truth or spilling real guilt, pause for a second. Think about it. In Problem Dog, when he's in that NA meeting, basically confessing to murder without saying meth or Walt, he is being more honest than anyone else in that room. The details are coded, but the emotion is exact. Then look around. Who actually hears him? That's the pattern you're tracking. Every time Jesse is honest, clock the responses. Who dismisses him as dramatic? Who mocks him as a junkie? Who quietly files it away as useful leverage instead of, a human being falling apart? In End Times, when he freaks out about Brock being poisoned, his logic is messy, but here's the thing. His instinct is dead on. Watch how Walt pivots that honesty into a weapon, turning Jesse's fear into a story about Gus. It's not just cruel. It's another missed opportunity for anyone to ask, wait, why is Jesse always the one screaming the truth first? Do the same with Confessions and Rabid Dog. In Confessions, Jesse's paranoia about Walt isn't some random outburst. It's the only accurate read of the situation in the entire diner. In Rabid Dog, when he's ready to burn Walt's house down, the show frames him as unstable. On your rewatch, ask yourself, unstable, or the only character reacting proportionally to what Walt's actually done? Now, layer in a twist. On this run, pretend you've never met Walt or Hank before. Judge them only by what Jesse says about them in real time. Hear me out. Treat Jesse as the primary reliable narrator. When he calls Walt a liar, when he calls Hank a cop who only cares about the big collar, accept that as your default truth. Does the whole show suddenly feel tilted? Do Walt's proud dad moments start to look like cover? Does Hank's tough guy charm start to feel more like a red flag you missed the first time? And I want you to take this one step further. Drop in the comments, what was the exact scene where you personally started fully trusting Jesse? Was it Brock? Jane? The money-throwing meltdown? Then ask yourself, is that the same moment the other characters should have trusted him too, or were you actually way ahead of them? Because this trust the wrong character problem. Breaking Bad is not alone. Other shows pull the same trick with different faces, and once you start watching for it here, you're going to see it everywhere, especially in the next series we're breaking apart. So where does that leave Jesse Pinkman? Not as Walt's goofy sidekick. Not as the punchline who says yo a lot and screws up the science. Think about it, the version of Jesse you've been watching this whole time is mostly the version everyone else decided he was. The burnout student. The junkie screw-up. The guy you pat on the head, then ignore when he starts yelling that something's wrong. But here's the thing, strip all that away, and what you're left with is a tragic protagonist. His main conflict isn't just with Walt, or the cartel, or the DIA, it's with the story everyone keeps telling about him. A story so loud that even when he's finally honest, it sounds suspicious because of who it's coming from. You see it with his parents, who already wrote him off long before Walt ever knocked on his door. You see it with Hank, who treats him like low-level trash even when Jesse is practically handing him Heisenberg on a plate. You see it with Walt most of all, carefully destroying Jesse's credibility in front of Gus and Mike, then using that unstable label as armor. Every time Jesse tries to do the right thing, someone else cashes in on his bad reputation. Another missed opportunity. Now, zoom out for a second. Because this isn't just the TV problem. You probably know a real-life Jesse. Someone whose addiction, or record, or neighborhood, or job title means they start every conversation 10 points down on the trust scoreboard. They tell the truth, but at the time, nobody hears it as truth. It just sounds like noise coming from that kind of person. Hear me out. Breaking Bad is sneaky, because it doesn't just show you that dynamic, it makes you participate in it.